Chapter 34. Breystock. The cave that Reyes was taken to had formed naturally over many thousands of years. From the look of it, the place had been flooded many times throughout its life, slowly washing away all the soft rock and leaving a fine, salty residue on the walls and floors. The floor was uncomfortable to walk across. It slanted a little downhill away from the door, and in no real sense could it be considered flat. At its widest point, the cave could be no more than 8 feet across, but because of its odd shape, it was hard to make an exact judgment. Heltree stepped into the cave after Reyes. He stepped gingerly across the floor, avoiding the worst of the bumps, to one of the walls opposite the doorway, and used his torch to light another that was still resting in a sconce against the wall there. There, that should give you a little bit of light while you wait. Thank you, Reyes commented. A lone torch wouldn't provide a lot of light, but then it was quite a small room. One thing it did do was illuminate the room enough for Reyes to see the chair that had been placed against the wall just under and slightly to the left of the torch. The chair rested on a piece of wood that had clearly been placed under it in an attempt to keep the chair steady on the extremely uneven floor. "I'm sure Breystock will see you as soon as he can find the time," Heltree said. "I regret that I have other duties I should be attending to. I need to get back outside with some bows in case those harpies should come back." "Thank you, Heltree," Reyes said. "Oh, and Heltree." "Yes, Sir Knight," Heltree replied. Reyes was about to suggest that Heltree shouldn't worry too much about the 2 harpies they'd seen in the air by the lake. He was about to suggest that he didn't think they meant any harm. Then he wondered how he might explain how he knew these things, and instead he commented, "No matter. Be well." Heltree bowed and took his leave. Reyes was alone. He sighed and made his way over to the chair. His shoes were designed to handle the roughest roads of Florida, but he might as well have been barefoot for all the help they were on the floor of this cave. Making himself as comfortable as he could in the chair, he found that the wood put underneath to stabilise it actually had nothing to hold it in place. The act of sitting in the chair made that piece of wood rock gently between its 2 opposite corners. Time seemed to pass slowly. There was little to do except wait for Breystock to come and see him, and after only a few minutes, Reyes began to suspect that Breystock was in no hurry. The torch flickered occasionally, casting eerie shadows on the cavern walls. Reyes sat patiently staring at the entrance of the cave and listening to the sounds of the caverns. From somewhere came the sound of water dripping. Reyes suspected that it was coming from inside this very cave. Even so, the sound was nearly drowned out by other sounds. In one of the other caves, not too far from this one, was the sound of men being trained. There was almost constant shouting, accompanied occasionally by others yelling back in reply. Once in a while, those being trained would pair off, because the yelling would be replaced by the sound of metal against metal, and occasionally a loud hollow thump against something that sounded wooden. Even listening to the training, it became hard to keep track of the time down here. After the 3rd pep talk from the soldier's trainer and the 3rd clash of arms, Reyes began to suspect that he'd been waiting in this little room for at least an hour. Slowly, Reyes began to lose his patience. What could Breystock be doing that was so important that he was keeping Reyes waiting so long? Reyes rose from his chair and walked briskly over to the door of the cave. He gritted his teeth as he stepped on a pointed rock, doing nothing to improve his mood. When he reached the door of the cave, he took a quick peek at the passage that lay beyond, the same passage that Heltree had brought him along to bring him to the cave. It was dark and empty. There was a single torch burning about halfway along its length. On the other side of the passage from the torch was another passage, the one that Tamatha and Mobiolita had taken when they left to find Breystock for him. Reyes left the cave and approached this other passageway. Since there were no other caves or turnings before this side passage, it made sense to Reyes that this was the way that Breystock was going to have to come. The floor was a lot smoother than it had been in the cave, and although the walls here were a lot narrower than the cave, they felt somehow less claustrophobic. From here he could see more light coming from the next passage. By the look of it, the passage eventually took a turn to the left, but in the part that Reyes could see, there were no fewer than 3 torches pouring light into the corridor. There was also a lot of light coming out of one of the side caverns. It was from this cavern that the sounds of training were emanating. Reyes stood at the entrance to the passage for a few moments, wondering if he should head further into the caverns to find this Breystock for himself, or if he should return to the cavern with the rickety chair and wait as he had been told to. He was still uncertain as to what he should do, when he heard the sound of thick, heavy metal footsteps approaching him from along the corridor. They were headed towards him from the entryway into this part of the caverns. Reyes turned his attention towards the sound and waited for whoever was approaching to get within the light of the nearest torch. "Why are you here?" a voice in the darkness called. "Don't you have duties to be getting on with?" "Do you mean me?" Reyes replied. He still couldn't see the man who had spoken, although he had no doubt that the man could see him, since he was still very close to one of the torches. "I don't see anyone else," the voice said. "I don't see anyone," Reyes commented. He looked quickly towards the better lit passage and added, "I'm waiting to see Breystock." "What, here?" the man said. Finally he stepped into the light of the torch. He was a man in the armour of the Lufton militia. It had been his thick armoured boots that Reyes had heard so clearly approaching him along the corridor, his and those of the man with him. "This was where I was told to wait," Reyes said, glancing briefly over his shoulder at the cave he'd been taken to. "Well, there, really. But I thought I'd see him coming if I waited here." The soldier shook his head. "You'll be here all day. Your best bet is to go and find him." The soldier pointed along the lit passage. "Follow that passage until you find the map room. Once there, the way on should be obvious from the position of the guards." "Thank you," Reyes said. The soldier smiled, and then he and his friend continued on past Reyes, entering the lit passage themselves. They walked past the cavern from which the sounds of training were coming from, and after about a minute disappeared beyond the curvature of the passage. Reyes brushed the dust off of his clothing, and then entered the lit passage himself. Now he knew where to find Breystock. Maybe it would make more sense than hanging around waiting for the leader of the Lufton resistance to come to him. The cave, which the sounds of training were coming from, had no door to hide what was going on within from anyone passing in the passage. As Reyes reached the doorway, he couldn't resist a quick look to see what sort of training the men here were getting. It was a large cave. It could probably hold a good 200 men at any time, though at most there were no more than 50 in there at the moment. It was a very well lit cave. There seemed to be more light flooding out of that cave into the passage than that being generated by any of the nearby torches. By the look of it, the floor of the training cave had been very rough and uneven. It was now covered by a wooden floor that sounded hollow every time anyone hit it. Reyes stayed there watching for only a minute or two. When the people in the room began to realise they were being watched, Reyes decided it was time to press on along the passage. Slowly he followed the passage's slight curve to the left, walking past a number of other caves, only some of which had doors. From what little he could see in the caves without doors, and the sounds of snoring that could be plainly heard even from the caves that did have doors, Reyes quickly surmised that he was in the dormitory section of the cave network. He couldn't blame the soldiers for sleeping during the day, not if they were striking out against the elves in Lufton during the night. As well as caves, Reyes also passed a few side passages. Since the soldier had told Reyes to follow the passage until he found the map room, Reyes didn't allow himself to be sidetracked. The passage continued to curve, until Reyes judged that it almost had to be bending back on itself. He supposed that there was a good chance that he had been descending a little, and that the passage might even have crossed its own path at some stage. Eventually the passage took him to a large rounded cavern. As with many of the other caves down here, the floor had been flattened as much as was possible, and a layer of wood covered it to make it as flat and stable as possible. This time the floor had been laid properly, as it didn't sound hollow as Reyes walked across it. In the very centre of this cave sat a large wooden table on which was located a currently unlit lantern and a large map of Lufton and its immediate surroundings. This had to be the map room that the soldier had mentioned. The soldier had also told Reyes that the way on to Breystock was obvious, because of the guards. Well, there were 2 guards in the map room. Neither of them seemed to be paying any real attention to Reyes. They seemed to be guarding one of the other side passages that led out of this room. Reyes wandered slowly over to the map and began to look at the situation there. Whoever had made this map had done a good job of it. The location of the open barracks was well marked, as was the movement of the various patrols that guarded the streets at night. Whoever had made this map had even gone so far as to mark in the location of the 2 harpy villages that had settled nearby. The map wasn't extensive enough to show the lake or the entrance to the underground caverns, but then, why would they need to? "Can I help you, sir?" One of the guards seemed to finally notice him. "I'm here to see Breystock," Reyes replied. The guard indicated along the passageway that he was protecting. "He's in his rooms, sir. It's the 3rd door to the left. It's easy to spot. There'll be a couple of men on duty just outside the door. You can't miss it." "Thank you," Reyes said. He hadn't expected that. Reyes had thought the guards were there to stop people from simply taking a stroll along that particular passage. He had assumed that they would stop him from going on. He certainly didn't expect them to give him direction. The 3rd door on the left was of a very strange shape. It fitted the cave mouth like a glove, but by the look of it had to open out into the passage. Since the passage itself was quite narrow at this point, this meant being on the right side of the doorway when the door was opened. There were 2 guards on duty at the door, and they watched Reyes approach with barely any interest. Reyes stopped in front of the door and contemplated the 2 guards, and then he said, "I'm here to see Breystock." "General Breystock," the soldier to the left of the door said firmly. Then, in a softer tone, he said, "I'll check to see if he'll see you, Mr. Sir the Moth," Reyes said pompously. If Breystock was going to insist on being a general, then Reyes was also going to use his rank. "You're the knight?" the militiaman commented. He snorted and then opened the door and stepped into the cave. Although he had to wait outside in the passageway, the door was thin and flimsy enough for Reyes to hear what was being said in the caverns. "Sir," that was the militiaman's voice, "there's a knight in the passage to see you." "A knight?" came the reply. There seemed to be a moment of hesitation, and then, "Tamatha's knight? I have no time to see him now. Take him to one of our empty caves and tell him to wait. I'll visit him when I'm ready." "Yes, sir." The militiaman sounded a little meek as he spoke. Reyes sighed. Perhaps time wasn't all that urgent, but right now it felt extremely important. He reached for the door handle with the intent of entering the room himself. "What are you doing?" the militiaman who was still with him asked. "I'm going in," Reyes insisted. "As a knight of the realm, I order you to stand down." The militiaman seemed to think about it for a moment, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his sword. Then he bowed just ever so slightly and took a step back from the door. Reyes opened the door and entered the caves. If anyone could be said to be living comfortably in these caverns, it had to be Breystock. For a start, the floor of his cave was flat, the walls were smooth, and there was more furniture in this one cavern than Reyes had seen in the whole of the rest of the underground network so far. If he didn't know better, Reyes could easily imagine that he was in the room of a palace. There were 3 men in the room: the militiaman whom Reyes had met outside, a healthy-looking man in the clothes of a young noble, Breystock presumably, and an elderly man with a white scruffy beard and the clothes of a peasant. "Who are you?" the man who was presumably Breystock insisted. "Who gave you permission to just barge in here as if you own the place?" "Watch him," the old man warned. "That ring he's wearing is magical." "I pulled rank," Reyes said. He looked at the old man. Clearly he was a man with some magical talent, but was he a real magician, or a little more than a circus performer? "I am a knight of the realm." "Do you have any proof of this?" Breystock pressed. He paced the room, stopping by the old man. "It's Fast on duty with me today, sir," the militiaman who was in the room said. "Fast?" Breystock said and nodded. "He'd believe the sky was pink if you told him." "I'm sorry," Reyes replied, "but I couldn't wait any longer. I had to see you. You must be Breystock." "General Ross Breystock," the old man insisted. "I'm a very busy man," Breystock said. "I have a heavy schedule. I have to plan a raid against the elves in order to feed my people. I don't have time for whatever trivia." "The king sent me," Reyes said. "He wants your army." Breystock paused in mid-step. He placed his foot slowly and firmly on the floor, and then turned to face Reyes, every movement deliberate. "I should have you executed." "What?" Reyes said. "Everyone knows the king is dead, murdered by the elves in First Town. All that remains is for us to do what we can. There is no one else. We, the defenders of Lufton, stand by ourselves, alone against the elven incursion. We shall fight and die to the last man, but we'll make them know they were in a fight." "I've seen some of these defenders of Lufton," Reyes replied. "I've seen how they're starving slowly to death. Some are probably too far gone already. I can feed your people. I can give your people hope, the likes of which they haven't known since the elves first set foot on Lufton soil. And all I have to do is hand over my forces to someone I don't even know," Breystock said. He approached Reyes menacingly. "I mean, who are you really? You come in here claiming to be a knight of the realm. You claim to have been sent by the king. What other false claims are you going to try and make?" "I can take you to the king," Reyes said. "And all I have to do is trust you," Breystock replied. "The country needs you. The king needs you," Reyes argued. "The elves also want me," Breystock said. "The elves will do anything to remove this thorn in their side. That ring you're wearing is magical." He glanced briefly at the old man for confirmation. The old man nodded. "Give me the ring," Breystock said. "Let me examine it." "I can't do that," Reyes replied nervously. "I want to see you remove that ring," Breystock insisted. "For all I know, you're really an elf sent by the local area commander, or whatever they call their leaders. How do I know the ring isn't what's making you look human? My name is Reyes the Moth, Reyes said. He was beginning to feel quite nervous. The ring is magical. It was given to me as a gift by my mentor, Mangalos the Magician. I've heard that Mangalos wasn't at the feast, the old man commented. If he still lives, we could use his expertise. Breystock walked over to a chest of drawers. Sitting on top of the chest was a sheathed curved blade. Breystock took the blade and removed the scabbard. Take the ring off or I'll cut your hand off. You threaten me, Reyes replied. I'll show you what the ring does. A second later he had put his clothing back into the ring and was standing in front of Breystock in his full armour, his sword in his hand and ready for a fight if necessary. Breystock blinked. He let his sword droop a little towards the ground in an unthreatening manner. Impressive. Reyes glanced behind him quickly at the militiaman who was also in the room and was staying quiet. The militiaman bowed and then opened the door and made his departure. Why the harpy motif? Breystock asked. Why would you choose that? I didn't, Reyes said, putting the armour back in the ring and returning to the gentleman's clothing. It was chosen for me. Mangalos had everything made for me. The ring, the armour, the sword. Everything. Everything, Breystock said. Reyes smiled. He felt he was beginning to get Breystock's confidence, and even felt like showing off a little. He reached out with his hand and summoned the horse from the ring. Breystock's mouth drooped. That's an interesting ring. What do you want for it? Reyes laughed. It's not for sale. Breystock looked over his shoulder at the old mage and then rested the point of his sword lightly on the wooden floor of his cave and said, I'm the leader of these people. What I say goes, and as such I get first choice of the best equipment. That includes your ring. Now, hand it over. Are you serious? Reyes asked, disbelieving. You just now saw me dressed in armour. I could summon that armour again in an instant, and you think I'm worried about you? Breystock smiled. He walked over to the chest of drawers and placed his sword lightly on top of it, making it clear to Reyes that Breystock wasn't intending to fight. I'm not threatening you. You came here seeking my help. You want my army? Well, this is my price. I want your ring. You would set a price on your loyalty to the king, Reyes said. The king is dead, Breystock replied. The entire royal family was slaughtered at the wedding feast. Now it's every man for himself. Give me the ring and maybe I'll lend you my army. King Erestein is dead, Reyes replied angrily. King Goatee still lives. Breystock shook his head. The entire royal family was slaughtered. Who told you this? Reyes pressed. Well, the Breystock started. The elves, Reyes finished for him. Doesn't matter, Breystock said. I want that ring, and I mean to have it. He turned his head towards the old man and commanded, Colston, put the knight to sleep. Go to sleep, Reyes told the old man, and with a quick wave of his hand, the mage slumped back against the wall and was sliding down it to the floor. You know magic? Breystock said nervously. A little, Reyes growled. A knight who knows magic, Breystock said. You're an anomaly. You don't know the half of it. Reyes approached Breystock menacingly. So, you want the ring, do you? Want to know if I'm really human? Breystock sounded unsure. Reyes returned the clothes he was wearing to the ring. You want my ring? Breystock voiced worriedly. You're naked. Did you mean to do that? Reyes took the hammerstone off of his finger. Instantly his body reverted to its natural appearance. Oath! Breystock started. Reyes reached out with his hand and grabbed Breystock roughly round the neck. Then he pushed him back towards the cavern wall behind him. I may be a harpy, but I seem to have more loyalty to King Goatee in the claw of my smallest finger than you seem to have in your entire body. Breystock didn't answer. He was wide-eyed with shock. Your people need a new leader. I think I'll tell Tamatha she needs to take over. She should be in charge here anyway. She may be young, but she knows the score. You, on the other hand, seem to think that this war exists purely for your benefit. The people will never obey a young girl, Breystock replied. They might, Reyes told him, if the king tells them to. When I tell the people that you're a harpy, Breystock friend, think they'll believe you? Reyes let go of Breystock's neck. Then he slipped the ring back on his finger, and a moment later he was both human and dressed again. Besides, Tamatha already knows. After all, the elves were going to execute her. She saw my true form when I rescued her. Tamatha said nothing to me, Breystock commented. Why would she? Reyes replied. He turned away from Breystock and walked slowly over to the door. She knew I was loyal to the king and queen. What species I am is irrelevant. Breystock grabbed the hilt of his sword and waved it menacingly towards Reyes. Fear seemed to clutch tight to his heart, adversely affecting his skill. Put that away, Reyes said. Tamatha will be placed in charge. You can still serve her well. Over my dead body, Breystock insisted. He advanced slowly on Reyes, his sword, making 1 or 2 practice swipes in the thin air. Reyes was certain he could kill Breystock easily, but he hadn't come here to execute the leaders of the Lufton resistance. Instead, he said 3 little words. Go to sleep. Breystock let go of his sword. He toppled over backwards, and was soon lying on the wooden floor of the room and snoring gently to himself. Reyes sighed. He looked at the sleeping forms of Breystock and Coulson. This wasn't exactly how he had imagined this conversation would end. Then he walked over and opened the door of the room. Finished, sir? One of the militiamen asked. Reyes shook his head. Would one of you go and fetch Tamatha for me? She's going to be taking over the resistance for a short while. Tamatha? The militiaman said. But she's only 10. She also happens to be the Duchess of Borton, and is probably more aware of what's going on than most of the soldiers down here, Reyes replied. What does General Breystock have to say about this? The militiaman asked. General Breystock is taking a quick nap, Reyes replied. He's left me in charge until Tamatha can take over. Now, go and fetch her. Yes, sir, the soldier agreed with a salute.